Welcome back to Beyond Recovery, everybody. My name is Matt. My guest today is Teri Patterson. Teri is a functional nutritionist and a This Naked Mind senior coach. Teri blends her knowledge of nutrition with her passion for living an alcohol-free life into a unique business as the Sober Nutritionist. Teri's mission is to help her clients discover that Teri's mission is to help her clients discover how drinking less can be the key to better health. Teri, how are you today?
I am doing great. It's so nice to be here.
Yeah, great to have you on. And we're doing a little show swap here. I'm going to be on your show tomorrow, so I'm looking forward to that as well.
Absolutely.
That's great. Well, let's get right into your story. I would like to start with your business. I'm very interested with this, the Sober Nutritionist. How did it come about? What was the origin story of your business?
Yes. So what happened for me was I was always sort of a wellness enthusiast, even when I was drinking. And I would do all of the healthy things, whatever the trend was in that time, whether it was drinking green juice or adding more protein or trying liver tablets, whatever it was. And I never really questioned the role alcohol was playing, but I did a little bit of coaching without any sort of certification or licensure, just kind of walking people through like taking a 30-day break. So when I became alcohol free, the first thing that I thought about is, well, what do I want to do with all this time and energy? And so that's when I became a functional nutritionist. And what was interesting to me was that no one was having the conversation around alcohol. I thought, I am going to drop into this group of people studying nutrition, and these are going to be my people. They're all going to be on the same path as me. And almost no one was alcohol free or even questioning alcohol. In fact, we had our celebratory graduating dinner with alcohol in the midst, as most people do. So after spending about 3 years as a health coach, I found the work of Annie Grace with This Naked Mind. And at that time, she had not certified any coaches. And so I kind of dove into her work and thought, wow, this is really interesting. This is what I would have needed. And so I became a follower and, a proponent, an early adapter of her methodology. I would share it with my clients. And then in early 2019, they announced that they were going to certify coaches. And so I jumped into that and I became a certified coach with This Naked Mind. It's just been about 3 years. And so I decided that I wanted to still help people, see this as a wellness journey, as a way for them to really embrace true wellness. And I wanted to help educate people around the disconnect that alcohol is healthy, red wine is heart healthy, that if we drink in moderation, there's no problems. And so, the name of my business, The Sober Nutritionist, is really who I am. And I work mostly with, alcohol-free clients and groups. I work a little bit with business coaching, brand new sober coaches. And then I do some nutrition as well, but mostly it's sort of a blend. And so it's been really full circle for me. And just so amazing to work in this field.
It's beautiful. It feels like, I imagine it's a lot of these different things, these elements that have found their way into your life, and then you're able to just combine them all and then just move forward in one direction. So it's really cool that, that it worked out like that for you. One question, I want to dive into This Naked Mind and Annie Grace. And so maybe folks that aren't familiar with her, a big on my side as well, and my fiance Darcy read This Naked Mind. She started with it actually, and then passed it on to me, and then I read it, and that was a part of our sober journey as well. So I have massive amounts of respect for her and her work, and the work that you guys are doing. So I was tickled, to say the least, that you reached out to me, and just to get on and just I sort of have the in and be able to talk to somebody that's working with Annie and with This Naked Mind. So yeah, what can you say about that? Like, if anybody that's not super familiar with her work, what is, like you mentioned, This Naked Mind was interesting and her work was interesting. Let's dive into that. What did you find so interesting about it? Why did it connect with you so much? And why would it be, important for folks to look her up at this point?
Yeah, I love that question. And I too have, just so much respect for the work that she's done. So Annie herself was someone who was on her own journey to drinking less. And she really questioned, why was I able to enjoy life when I was younger. And now I can't seem to enjoy anything without a drink. And so she, excuse me, she really, decided to look at the science. And so she spent about a year finding out everything she could about, how alcohol affects our brain, how, our thoughts play into this kind of addiction, what alcohol use disorder is all about. And she wrote a book called This Naked Mind. And that was right around the time that I became alcohol free in late 2015. And so she put this book out in the world. And from that, people started reaching out to her and asking, what is this all about? And so she decided to develop, based on her methodology, a 30-day program for people to take a break. And so to this day, This Naked Mind has a 30-day alcohol experiment that's entirely free, that has 30 videos, that just dives into the science behind what is keeping us stuck. All of the things from, society, the actual substance of alcohol, and then the beliefs we have about ourselves. And from that book, she then wrote a book called The 30-Day Alcohol Experiment, which you can also purchase. And she started some live teaching with coaching in these large programs called the Live Alcohol Experiment. And so I've been fortunate to coach in, 7 or 8 different groups. And these are big groups, 1,500, 2,000 people come together for 30 days. And they just explore what is behind this, this relationship they have with alcohol. Because we, really talk in this Naked Mind methodology about the science and where our thoughts are keeping us stuck, but also what's happening with the brain and with all the other ways that alcohol is connected to this desire to drink, this lack of control we feel about drinking, and really this cognitive dissonance where we're of one mind that, okay, it's, woke up feeling like hell once again. I'm not going to drink tonight. And that's at 8:00. And by 5:00, we're pouring the drink. And so many people, are stuck in that cycle and not understanding the why. And so with this Naked Mind methodology, we really talk about the why.
Yeah, fantastic. That's what really stood out to me as well. And just the idea that it's, there was no pressure language as far as like you have to quit. In fact, it's an experiment. Like you say, you can be your own scientist, and and then that way there's no, yeah, because there's different ways to do it, right? And I never reacted very well. Like my doctor told me to stop drinking. Guess what I did? As soon as I got out of there, I went and bought a 6-pack. I'm like, yeah, sure, buddy, right? So it's like the idea that there's this like this almost playground, or you can be your own scientist, and just the language she used really resonated with me. And when you're saying 2015 when that came out, I mean, there's been so much of sober like quit literature since then, but honestly back then there wasn't too much of that I didn't find anyways. I mean, we were looking, Darcy and I, so when we found that, and I think it was a little bit after 2015, probably would have been more like 2017, but even still, like it was such a unique presentation and book. So yeah, glad, thanks for commenting on that. What, by the way, what was your why that you found? Because that is such a great question, right? Is like the why behind the addiction, or the what did you find that was yours, or was there several?
Yeah, I think for me, I was really in a place where drinking had been fun and just part of my social world, and it was fine for a long time. And then suddenly I found it creeping in more and more and more. And I felt a disconnect between how I wanted to show up in the world and the healthy person I was trying to become, that wellness enthusiast, and the drinking. And it was, kind of this niggling doubt for a long time. But, I describe it now when I think back is that I was miserable drinking. And I thought I would be miserable not drinking. And so I played that game for a long time. Well, I'll just drink less, and then the misery will not enter into the picture at all. And we know that's not true, partly because of the patterns that we have around drinking, the habits that we create around drinking, and really the way that alcohol works in our brain, creating those chemicals that keep us feeling a little bit more anxious, a little bit more depressed, a little bit more stuck in that guilt, shame cycle. And so I finally got to a point where I just thought, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't know what it looks like on the other side. I don't know anybody that's not drinking. And I might be miserable, but if I'm really miserable not drinking, I could always go back to drinking. And so I decided to try plan B. And that was really because, as I described to people from day one, I just said alcohol was no longer serving me.
Yeah, I mean that's a pretty powerful reason or a pretty powerful thing to look at, isn't it? Well, let's go back even further. I'm interested to know what your the origin story of you with alcohol was. Like, was it in your family? What kind of environment did you grow up in? Can you tell us a little bit about like the beginnings of your relationship with alcohol, please?
Yeah, I remember my parents would have cocktails in the evening. My dad was a pilot, so my parents were not together every night because he would be on trips often. So any night they were together, they had their Manhattans. I remember the maraschino cherry and the maraschino cherry juice. And I remember taking little sips and thinking, ah, why are they drinking this stuff? It tastes terrible. And then, I tried, my sister was a little bit more of the wild child than I was, and she was a year older. And so any of the partying behavior I had usually involved my sister. And I can remember the very first time I drank to excess and I was really, really sick. And I thought, well, I'm not doing that again. But of course, just growing up in the 70s, that was the thing that, alcohol was sort of the drug of choice. And, as I got older and met and married my husband, we started bringing alcohol. When I met my husband, he didn't drink. And so we started bringing alcohol in little by little, and we thought it was so sophisticated in our early 20s to go wine tasting and have dinner groups that included wine. And, it was all jolly for a while. And then what happened was we moved in, and actually there was a few things that happened first, but it just gradually, like my parents became amateur winemakers. They lived in the Napa Valley, and so I wanted to drink my dad's red wine. And then I can remember when we moved to the country. We'd been living in suburbia, and we moved about 3 hours away, and we only knew one other couple. And when you move to a new community, you sort of try on friends. And so we were out there in the social world of our little community, and there was a lot of drinking involved in getting to know people. It's really interesting now because I think now, how well do we really know each other if all we were doing was drinking together, or a lot of what we were doing? And so it felt very normal for a while, but then we started drinking more at home and more regularly when we first moved to this small community in 2000. So this is interesting. This was a 15-year journey from the time that I realized that alcohol was sort of becoming bigger in my life than I wanted it to until I stopped. And there was a lot of conversation in my head, not necessarily a lot of stopping drinking or taking trial periods or having alcohol-free stints. It was really just a conversation in my head. And I, spent those 15 years thinking about, I don't want to drink this much, but, I was still drinking. And it wasn't ever, what we consider the traditional rock bottom. I didn't have a lost job, or thank God, no DUIs. Most of my drinking was at home, but I just gradually lost part of myself. And I've always been someone who is an enthusiastic learner and someone who wants to challenge myself. And it was really getting in the way, because I think we can all recognize if we are over drinking, we're spending a lot of time drinking. It takes hours. I would come home from work, and, I only worked for 16 years full time. And during that time, I would come home from work and I would just drink from then until I went to bed. And it seemed like very normal behavior, a couple glasses of wine, cooking dinner, maybe a glass on the couch, and then kind of pass out. And then same thing the next day. And weekends, throw a few cocktails in there. So I was definitely drinking every day, and I was definitely drinking more than I wanted to, but I wasn't crashing and burning. I was just not happy.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Would you classify yourself? Would you say it was sort of like gray area? Like it sounds like if you're doing, every like daily drinking, but you're kind of like it's ambiguous if it's really affecting your life, but somewhere in your head you're like, well, yeah, it definitely kind of is. Like you're mentioning that you're enthusiastic about learning and such, yet there's this like when you introduce the alcohol, it gives it some degree of resistance. Would you have classified yourself as that?
Yeah, I think so. And I also think that, gray area drinking is an interesting uh place to discuss because
Yeah.
I see people, I work with I coach one-on-one, but I also coach in this Naked Mind in some of these big groups. And so I've literally come alongside thousands of people. And it's been fascinating to watch the spectrum from people who are drinking more than what I just described, which was quite a lot, to people that are maybe just struggling with drinking a glass of wine a night.
Mm.
And so I think that gray area drinking really is a gray area in describing. I think the common nomenclature of it is around there isn't a rock bottom, there isn't a,
Mm.
rehab stint, maybe. But I definitely was drinking on the heavier side of what I would even call gray area drinking.
Yeah, got you. I'm definitely interested by that concept. I'm getting into it a lot more now. Whereas like for me, my first stint of drinking was definitely the gray area, and then when I would try moderation, it would end up being these binges. I go 5 or 6 days, and then be like, now it's time, and just let loose for 3 days. So yeah, I'm kind of curious about that too. You touched on it there. So you've touched, you've gone into coaching like thousands of people at this point. How common is that? I imagine that the gray area, the confusion that comes along with the gray area is, I'm just imagining is probably the most prominent of anybody, right? Like if, then, because other than that, on the spectrum, you're getting, like you're saying, the person that's just feeling guilty about the one drink a day, which again, almost classifies as gray area. And then there's the person that's straight up, a candidate for like a rehab because they have this physical dependence and they're drinking literally from the time they wake up to the, right? So gray area must take a lot of the bandwidth of your coaching. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Yeah. I
Yeah.
typically don't work with or see a lot of people in the groups, those people that have had jail time due to alcohol, though they certainly are there. And there's no, the beautiful thing about coaching someone around their relationship with alcohol is that we get to connect with them where they are. And
Yeah.
one of the things about the methodology with this Naked Mind that I think is so beautiful and so open is that we don't start with behavior. So if someone comes and they are still drinking, we don't tell you to stop drinking. We say, we're going to quit trying to quit while we start learning. And we
Mm.
really start mindful drinking. So we first want to notice what is behind the behavior. What is the pattern of the behavior? What times of day are we drinking? What people are we drinking with? What feels like the most challenging time of the day to get through? And so all of that is part of where we start. Now, obviously, if someone comes to work with me or into one of our groups who is not drinking, we don't want you to go back to drinking. Unless, for some people, though, it's interesting because some people have changed their behavior, but they're still stuck and really kind of this sober but stuck.
Mm.
Or where I was afraid I would end up not drinking and still miserable. And so that's a place that's so fascinating because those people sometimes may start to drink in moderation while they start to explore because they are spending so much focus and energy on the not drinking that
Mm.
none of the learning or the growing or the changing is happening. And so sometimes those people will maybe go back into what we call the pause, where they are mindfully drinking less, exploring what comes up when they drink, and then they get to stop. And then when they stop, they have a much more or a higher rate of lasting change. It's fascinating.
I was about to say the exact same word. I'm like, it's so fascinating that everybody has this different journey, different mindset that they bring. It's so nuanced, right? There isn't necessarily a catch-all for recovery alcohol. Even the wording, like some people aren't super comfortable saying sobriety. They like, alcohol free, right? Or, there's different, yeah, and then there's different, modalities that have been used over the years, like AA, which is very, I'd say a little more binary, right? Is black and white for the most part, which is good, right? Because there is good to have some structure in your recovery where, I'm from what I'm hearing you say, this naked mind is a lot more just open, right? I'm liking what, just to summarize back to what you're saying is, there's it's not so much the focusing on these statements of negation of what you can't have and what you can't do anymore. It's focusing on the solution. What can you do now, right? And then that's just such a freeing energy versus the don't think of the pink elephant. Of course, you're going to think of the pink elephant. So don't think about not drinking. Of course, you're going to be thinking about not drinking. And you even touched on it that you had a phase of that where there was a little bit of like, the dry drunk, right? Where you're just like, you're sober, but you're not enjoying life, right? So,
Hmm.
yeah, interesting. So, yeah, let's get back into that stage, that transition for you. In 2015, where it's like, okay, you've realized what this has become. You're wanting to change. You have made that change. I'm just kind of curious, what were those early days like for you? And what did you use to get through? The first 3 months, the first year. What did that look like for you?
Yeah, that's a fascinating question. Sometimes I consider myself a little bit of a unicorn because, and I'm not certainly not the only one, but when people say, what tools did you use? I didn't do anything formally. I literally was afraid of AA because I lived in a small community and I had no knowledge of it. I didn't do any research around it. And now I would not be afraid of AA. In fact, I have been to some AA meetings in support of another family member.
Mm.
But at the time, I told myself, I'm going to stop drinking and I might need to go to meetings. And that was the first thing that we call in the methodology that I use is kind of that carrot and that stick. And I literally used AA as a stick. Like if I can't handle this on my own, I'm going to go to meetings. And so that was
Mm.
something that kept me really focused on, well, what can I do to handle it? What can I do? And I didn't read any books. There wasn't, as we mentioned already, there really wasn't as many options out there in 2015 that there are now. And so I didn't even read any literature about it. I didn't do anything, but now I see that I kind of naturally fell into some things that I now use as part of my coaching style. And one of them was to have something that I was looking forward to, have a positive, area that I was moving into as opposed to just trying to handle the day to day. And I also, changed up my routine. I changed up what I would do when I would get home from work. I, drove home a different way. I did some things that you would think that makes sense, but I didn't do it under any sort of formal tutelage. I just sort of tried things. And so one of the things that happened for me in the early days was we know now from the science that alcohol is an anesthetic. So when we drink alcohol, we're really numbing our emotions. And so, our emotions get much more flat. And that might be why we drink. Like, I don't want have to deal with, somebody being angry, or I don't want to have a difficult conversation, or I don't want to have any confrontation or conflict. And so I drink and then everything's sort of flat. And alcohol doesn't selectively numb. So not only are we numbing the pain and the difficult parts, we're numbing joy, pleasure, happiness. And when we remove the alcohol, all of these emotions come flooding back. And there actually is a science part of that. And we can go into that if you want, but there is a mechanism, part of why that happens. And that is, in the brain. And so I was experiencing all these big emotions that I had been turning off, numbing out. And so the primary emotion for me that I didn't even identify until my husband said, "Why are you so angry?"
Hmm.
And I experienced a lot of anger. And one of the things, and this isn't always true, I mean, anger is an emotion in itself, but oftentimes anger is a secondary emotion. And what anger was shielding me from was fear. And I didn't
Hmm.
recognize this until my husband asked me, "Why are you so angry?" And I thought, I'm afraid. I don't know if I'm going to be able to do this long term. I don't know what life's going to look like on the other side. I'm seeing some parts of my life that feel disconnected, broken, not working well. And I don't know how to address them. That feels really scary. And so the shield that I used was anger. And so two things happened around that time is one is I opened the front page of my local newspaper and saw an interview with a woman who had gone to this amazing nutrition school. And I called her up and said, "I want to learn more about your school." And so I enrolled in nutrition school. And so that was something really positive to look forward to. It took a lot of time. It was a big distraction, but in a really beautiful way that felt like I was becoming more authentically me. And then my husband said, we're going to go to counseling. And so we spent several months, almost a year in counseling. And those two things were really pivotal for me to start to explore how to build the life I wanted on the other side of
Mm.
drinking.
Wonderful. Yeah, no, that paints the picture for sure. I'm seeing a recurring theme in your life. You definitely are, like what you mentioned earlier, like that lifelong learner. You seem very curious, and you like taking on things that will take some time and unfold and develop alongside you, like you with you alongside the whatever you're taking on, which is very inspiring. And I'm just curious too. What just to circle back into we're talking about your transition, like getting into alcohol free life. What were some of the justifications that you had for drinking, especially towards the end there? I'm always curious about this because I found every excuse they got quite elaborate towards the end because I'm like, oh, I had to go through this Rolodex of different justifications and such. What did that look like for you before you were able to pivot into this alcohol free life?
I think for me, it was really around I didn't know how I would engage with people.
Mm.
All of my social interactions and my relationship with my husband felt like they were built on a tower of wine bottles
Oh wow.
and, beer mugs. And I
Yeah.
drank it all. So whatever,
Yeah.
vodka
Yeah.
bottles.
Yeah.
So that felt really scary to understand how I might show up and engage with people. And I thought either they're going to be boring or I'm going to be boring.
Mm.
And that was a real fear. I just didn't know that. I thought I would be missing out. There was a lot of FOMO, of course. And so that was something that kept me stuck in that loop for a long time. And I also think that I was worried about my relationship with my husband, as I think
Mm.
most people are, that if I stopped drinking, what would that mean? And fortunately, I got to a place where I just thought, well, it's going to be my journey and it's independent of him and I'm going to do it for me. And I don't know what's going to happen on the other side. That's part of what the fear was, is I just didn't know how it was going to shake out. And I'm happy to say, that my husband and I will celebrate 40 years of marriage next month, and
Wow.
that he stopped drinking 2 years after I stopped drinking. And, our relationship is back to what we had in the beginning, but richer because of the years we've been together. And communication is really the key.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Congratulations. That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's a, that's, yeah, you don't see that too often anymore. There's, yeah, so all I can say is congrats. That's great. I have similar with my fiance that we both sobered up, and that was sort of our $1 million question too. Is like, are we gonna? So I totally relate. Like, are we gonna find each other boring? Like, our communication was totally based on like this the quote unquote openness of having a few drinks, and then yeah, there's definitely it's so much more nuanced and there's so much depth to it now. We're gonna have our 16-year anniversary this coming month, September.
Wow.
So same kind of thing, right? Whereas like there was that little dip, and then coming out the other side, it's like this uncertainty, but it's so much more rich and beautiful than it ever has been. So it's wonderful to hear your story as well. I'm curious about like this the group coaching meeting. You have so many people in a group, and it's like, okay, we have already talked about how nuanced alcohol-free living, sobriety, recovery can be and is. How do you present to people like that, as far as like when you got this big group of people? What kind of things are you saying? Are you just sharing your own story? Are you getting involvement? Are you getting somebody up on the stage? What does that look like when you're doing a group like that?
Yes. So, I do my own groups. And so that looks a little different than when I coach in with This Naked Mind. But in the methodology that This Naked Mind has, is the way they've set up their coaching is that there's a lot of support. So it's really on 4 pillars. So it is content, coaching, community, connection. And so it starts with the content. So people that come into our groups, we have a membership program called The Path, which is 90 days. The live alcohol experiment happens certain months of the year. I think the next time they're intentionally planning to offer it will be January, dry January. And so those groups are 30 days, just like it sounds, but they bring a lot of support in for the customer, in that there's daily content and then there's daily coaching. And in the
Mm.
membership program that goes for 90 days, it's twice a day coaching. So every day, someone can come into a Zoom call and ask questions and bring situations, celebrate their wins, talk about the content, share where they're at, share their struggles, talk about these concepts, and get coaching in the moment. We also do a live Q&A. So like if you've ever been in a Facebook group, we're not in Facebook, we're in another community, but it's like if you've ever popped in and someone's doing a live Q&A and you can type in questions. And so that is really more focused on helping understanding of the content. And so that's how those programs work. And the cool thing is that when you come into these programs, there's 7 coaches. So
Mm.
you're getting a different coach every day of the week.
Oh, cool.
And so if your style, if you and I, Matt, we have a great style together, I can already tell. But if you didn't mesh with me, you'd have 6 other options. And that really is a beautiful thing that happens in a big group. So our membership groups run around 300 people and they stay in the program for 90 days.
Cool.
And some people start in that, quit trying to quit, in that pause, and then they can grow from there. And then, of course, when you're doing, small group coaching with one coach, it looks very different. And so, what I like to do is work with, meeting people in a Zoom type of situation with not necessarily daily content, but with concepts that we explore.
Mm.
And I work with, my groups are primarily either coaches or after alcohol. So I never want anybody to stay fixated on not drinking.
Mm.
One of my goals for my clients is liberation. And so that really requires not only changing the behavior like we talked about, but creating this beautiful awareness of what is next for me on the other side. And so my after alcohol clients, really, we work on these big concepts of relationships and boundaries and permission, and
Mm.
just, in this beautiful place of allowing and exploring what's next. And that is part of my favorite coaching.
That's got to be. Yeah, that's that reminds me of like Tony Robbins always says, make sure that you have like a compelling future. And
Mhm.
it seems like very very similar to what you like you mentioned at the beginning of our interview here. Some of these things that you use personally in your life in your sobriety, now you're bringing it to coaching, which was bringing something to the table that's like, okay, this is something to look forward to. This is going to keep me on the path. And yeah, and you get again getting into that solution based a mindset and growth and expansion mindset versus being in that stuck old story and focusing on what you can't have anymore and such. So yeah, it's just beautiful. Even you saying it has this like wonderful energy to it. So it's really cool. Yeah, I love even the word liberation there as well. Let's get into the actual nutritionist side of things. I love how you're really focusing on you know how, let's face it, there's no way to say it otherwise, how bad alcohol is for you. It's literally just empty calories. It just wreaks havoc on the body, right? So I love how you're taking that more of that approach. And I'm just interested because you had mentioned there wasn't too many people questioning it, or there is the justification, or like, yeah, or these myths that are in there as well. So I want to get into this a little bit as far as like, for example, like if you eat after drinking, it soaks up the alcohol, or having a drink after the day after, like the day of the hair of the dog, and things of this
Mhm.
nature that people have been doing forever. And I'm sure you have such a dialed in, idea of what alcohol actually does. So, yeah, what are some of the things that you lead with as far as like when you're talking about nutrition and alcohol and removing alcohol?
So it kind of falls into 2 categories. There's the category of what's really going on with alcohol in our system, because alcohol affects every system in the body. So it affects your immune system, it affects your hormones, it affects your brain, it affects your digestion, it affects inflammation. I mean, everything affects your heart. So obviously your liver, we need to pay attention to that. And I love to talk about that. But I also get this question all the time, like, what do I do? Like I'm afraid that, I've done all this damage to my body, and, I'm
Mm,
afraid to get labs. And now what do I do? What can I do to get, healthy on the other side? And so because I predominantly coach, in these big groups, or when I shouldn't say predominantly, well, when I coach in these big groups, these people are not coming to me with a background. I don't know their history. And so I just help people start with some basics that really help us get back to baseline because, our body has this incredible ability to recover and to come back to homeostasis, come back into balance. In fact, that is what our body wants to do. We see when we think about nutrition, like certain things in our body will turn off to support digestion. Certain things in our
Mm.
body, we won't do other things if blood sugar regulation is in needing to be shored up. And then also when we're digesting alcohol, because it's so toxic, we turn off some of those other systems in order to purge alcohol from our body so that we're safe, so that we don't die. And so, we need to honor how we help our body get back to baseline. And so that is a little bit of a different conversation, but that's where I spend a lot of time just offering some education, like so what sometimes people don't realize is that, our liver has about 500 jobs. And when we are using our liver to predominantly metabolize alcohol, it's been taking a hit. It's been working really hard. So then people stop drinking and the liver starts to come back and then they want, like, what supplements should I take? Well, supplements have to be broken down and metabolized through the liver. And so we want to think about giving the liver a break. So I am a big proponent of doing some simple whole foods, healthy things that happen in the beginning versus throwing a lot of supplements at it. Is there a place for supplements later on? Perhaps. And that's really when someone is working with me more one-on-one. But in the meantime, we can do things like hydration, whole foods. If we're having a lot of gut inflammation and issues, we can back off some of the raw foods and do some cooked vegetables. Give our digestive system a break to calm down. We can take out some of the supplements we might be taking. Like people are like, well, I'm drinking a lot, so now I'm going to take vitamin C and vitamin D and, all of these things and calcium, and I'm going to once a day, so we can stop all that and give our liver a break while we get back to baseline. And whole foods and letting go of the processed foods and really focusing on some simple things is the best place to start.
That's great. Great advice. I love that. Yeah, that's there is a lot of so much mixed information about supplements. You know what I mean? It's just because they aren't necessarily given by obviously the doctors. It's not necessarily anything they learned. And then there's the whole unregulated side of it. And then man, so much like conflicting information about it and when to do it, and and then but beyond that, there's the wild card of your body's different than anybody else's body. So I'm glad that it's such basic, easily absorbable advice. So thanks for clearing that up. It's a great start for anybody.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about your podcast as well. So you got your podcast going on. How long have you been, going with that podcast? What does it look like? Is it sort of guest driven, or is it a little bit of your own advice coming up on there? Tell us about your podcast.
Yeah, well, thank you. I absolutely love it's one of my favorite things that I do with my business. And you probably share the same joy in connecting with people. And it
100%.
really is a beautiful way to just share my passion and hopefully maybe inspire people. And so my podcast is called The Sober Edge, and it really is inspiration for alcohol-free living. And so I really talk with people about, tell me all the cool, amazing things that happened after the drinking. So I focus much less on the drinking story and on, wow, now what? How amazing. And so I do interview a fair amount of coaches because every coach that I work with in this Naked Mind has their own unique story and offering and the way that they have taken their journey and turned it into this next iteration. I also recently I have talked to a woman who is a grief mentor. I've had people who have talked about chronic pain. So I try to bring interesting people that can sort of further the conversation to help us understand what this living alcohol-free looks like. I do have some solo episodes that I do from time to time where I just sort of share a topic. And I just published my first repost because I had a very interesting guest. So there is a woman named Christy Wynn who opened one of the first sober bars in the United States, and it's called Awake Denver.
Ooh,
And she happens to be a friend and a fellow coach. And so I actually was in Denver this past weekend. I was able to visit Awake and I met up with Christy. So I wanted to do a little update.
so cool.
So I'm still, early days of my podcast. I'm coming up on a year in October.
Nice.
And so I'm still sort of figuring out what is connecting with my audience. What do they like the best? And one of the things that I really enjoy doing is I enjoy, you know, marrying my podcast or connecting it with sort of my weekly how I touch base with people and just sharing something that I learned that week and that maybe the podcast really highlighted about this beautiful place that we get to explore on the other side of drinking.
Wonderful. Well, congrats on your the 1 year coming up on the podcast. It's fantastic. It truly is. It's a great way to just have some cohesiveness between your whole business, networking, all that. I love. I'm gonna have to listen to this episode. Awake Denver. That's such a cool
Mm.
concept, cool name, and what a great idea. There has been quite the rise in alcohol-free drinks. I've noticed. I'm up here in Canada. We're always a little bit behind behind the times. So for the longest time, at the grocery store, I had like Molson Excel and O'Doul's. And
Yep.
now you walk into the section, there's like non-alcoholic craft beer. There's like the Heinekens, the Becks, and all these. And it's just like amazing to see. So yeah, I guess that would be one of my, as we wind down, I have a few other questions for you. But first thing that comes to mind after what we're just talking about is like, how many people are you seeing that are, awakening, so to speak, and snapping out of this, idea that they have to numb out their feelings and they're looking at the sober living? Like, how has that been in your, say, the last 7 years that you've been doing the coaching? Is it reaching a big, like, yeah, just what is it? How is it developing? Has it been kind of like a slow burn and now it's like ready to, yeah, I'm just interested to see what your take is on it.
Well, one of the things that, I think is for me, because I'm in it, I have a little bit of this view that is myopic because, that
Mm,
I'm in it. I'm
fair
talking about it
enough.
all the time. I'm working with people. I'm looking for articles to share with people. I'm looking for resources. So I think sometimes when I take a step back, the movement feels really big. I think there's been we've gained a lot of ground in the last 3 years around just allowing people to feel more exploratory. Like, I'm not drinking tonight. She was Amanda White is a women's therapist who wrote a book. She was one of my first podcast guests.
Cool.
And that very thought about, I'm not drinking tonight for any reason. I've got, big day tomorrow. I have an athletic event. I'm the designated driver. I'm on a medication. I'm taking a short break from alcohol. We've really come a long way toward normalizing that and not having so much stigma around the terms that if I'm not drinking, I must be an alcoholic, which is, we prefer, at least in the coaching I do, we like to talk about alcohol use disorder because alcoholic can have a lot of connotations that can feel really negative to people, and labels are not, where we're really at. And so I think there's been a lot of new offerings for coaching opportunities and big groups where people can connect. We've seen, the Sober Quit Lit, the books that are coming out. We have more of those available now than we did in the last few years. We are seeing more sober offerings in the spirit-free and alcohol-free world. So we're starting to see huge movement in certain areas. There's a lot of ground to still cover.
Yes, very well put. I completely agree with you. So cool. My last question I always ask before we get into where we can find you online and everything else, I like to end off with this question. What does authenticity or being authentic mean to you?
Oh, I love that. My website, I have my name, the Sober Nutritionist, and then my little tagline says authentic living.
Ooh,
Yeah, so
I
I
love that.
really love that. Yeah, it's one of my sort of core values is to be authentic. And I think it involves looking at the hard parts of yourself. I really think it involves checking in on a regular basis and being willing to explore, is this aligned with who I want to be and where I want to head to in the future? And that, I think, is a wonderful place for people to explore when they are in that cycle of over drinking or considering cutting back. What would it feel like to be more authentic? Is this aligned? And I think one of the things that happens for many people is when we are drinking more than we want to. We really sort of erode that trust that we have with ourself because our no doesn't mean no and our yes doesn't mean yes. And we're really not showing up authentically. And so
Mm.
I think that if people want to explore what does it look like to live an authentic life, it involves doing that little bit of an inventory and asking yourself, am I showing up in the way that makes me proud of myself, that builds trust with myself? What is my intuition telling me? I think before we stop drinking, we've been hearing from that little inner voice for a long time. And I think that is our authentic place.
Ooh,
So,
that's
yeah,
fantastic. I love it.
great question.
So cool. Yeah, I love how that's part of your what is it, the subtitle you said on your website?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Awesome. Okay, so I want to give you a chance to just let everybody know where to find you, and I also want to take some time and like if you want to unpack like what the whole process is as far as like if somebody's interested in getting like a coaching call, like what does that look like? Is there like the first call free discovery call type thing? What does that whole process look like for you?
Yeah, well, thank you for that opportunity.
Of
I love
course.
to connect with people. And if you are sober curious, it's a great place to start is there's lots of coaches out there. And I want to invite people, you can definitely connect with me, but look for a coach that is aligned with you because this is a place where you want to feel really comfortable, safe, connected, and hopefully inspired. I mean, that is one of the things that I love to bring into my coaching is to inspire people and help them understand what really is possible on the other side. We don't have to play small. And so you can connect with me. Let's see, I am thesobernutritionist.com is my website. And I absolutely do offer a breakthrough discovery call just where I have certain clients that are a natural fit for me, and I always want the potential client to know and feel that it's a fit for them as well. So the discovery call is nothing that anyone has to be afraid of. It's really just getting to know what's available when it comes to coaching. What does it look like? And for my one-on-one clients, I offer typically, sometimes, we do things a little different, but all of my coaching is really customized because as I mentioned, we meet people where they are in the coaching world. And so there's no prescriptive formula about how it looks because it would depend on you. And so I do a 3-month package for most of my clients. I also do some limited one-on-one nutrition coaching that you can find out about. Again, same website, The Sober Nutritionist. I'm on Instagram at teri.thesobernutritionist, and my podcast is The Sober Edge.
Excellent. I'll make sure to throw all that in the show notes. Yeah, any final words? I'll let you. Is there any, if somebody is listening and they are sober curious, or, to having a rough day, I always like to just leave the forum open to my guests of any closing words. Before you do, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Yeah, well, thank you for the opportunity. It's so wonderful to connect with people that are, doing this similar work, but we all have our different offerings out there in the world, and it's beautiful to connect with someone who is also. So thank you for the work that you do.
Oh, you're most welcome. Thanks for saying that.
Yeah, and so I think, what I will say to you is that we don't have to put so much effort. We think that willpower and efforting is the way to change our behavior. And we spend a lot of time in shame and blame and guilt. And I want to tell you that if you feel that, I want to allow you to think about letting go of that because if shame and blame worked, Matt and I wouldn't have a reason to offer a podcast in the world, right? Or I wouldn't have a coaching business. It doesn't work. And so what we want to use is those gifts of self-compassion, grace, and we want to explore doing a little bit different. If what you've tried in the past has left you feeling defeated, I want to invite you to explore what else is out there.
Great place to leave it. Teri, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
You're welcome. Thank you.